step into the light before darkness falls.
Listen to the wind. Drifting past your senses is the fuel that fires the imagination. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Consider the element that floods into your lungs, the very same substance that long ago fanned an ancient spark, ignited by a primeval author, chiseling veiled petroglyphs across a dim cave wall. Carried on a breeze spanning eons, it was the breath that gave rise to dinosaurs, grew papyrus for paper, and dried vibrant oils brushed over canvas. It has since walked on the surface of the moon. It fondly recollects a childhood memory, violently reshapes the landscape of history, and blows away the fog surrounding the unknown. It rushes by in a heartbeat, inhaled at first, exhaled at last. One moment here, the next gone into thin air.
Our kingdom, in microcosm, my dear, a short-lived galaxy.
King Ivis Mapilis Oberon IV knelt down beside his young daughter, Princess Ophelia Droxine, and stared intently into one of the numerous tidal pools that dotted the shoreline beneath the towering ramparts of the royal family's acropolis on planet Imperious Prime. Ophelia gazed in wide-eyed wonder at the countless swarms of tiny sea creatures that skittered beneath the glistening surface of captive seawater, wondered at their collective diversity, and dreamed of a destiny that was hers to someday undertake, heir to the throne of the Imperium.
Father,
She said timidly.
what's it like?
King Ivis watched his beautiful little girl as she poked her dainty hand into the pool, trying to touch a brilliantly colored seahorse.
What's that, my child?
He asked. Showing no sign of fear whatsoever, the little animal unfurled its tail from around an outcropping of coral and coiled it in a loop on Ophelia's index finger.
To be king of all the known universe. It seems quite overwhelming to me.
The king chuckled warmly at his daughter's innocence and earnest sincerity.
I suppose it is. Why do you ask?
He replied. Ophelia slowly swirled her hand around the immediate space in the pool that she could reach, giving the seahorse a gentle ride up to near the water's edge.
Well,
She said thoughtfully.
because someday I won't just be Princess Ophelia. Someday I will be a queen.
Ivis tasseled her elegantly braided pigtails and smiled.
Dearest, you're only 7 years old now. Don't worry yourself needlessly over something so far-flung as that. While it is true that this will someday be your role to play, the curtain will not rise for your performance until you are good and ready, until you are grown.
Gesturing in a wide arc around the edges of the tidal pool, he said,
Until that time, this can be your kingdom and these your faithful subjects. You already have that tiny horse wrapped around your little finger.
Ophelia moved her hand next to a bright green clump of swaying seaweed, and the seahorse released its grip and swam away beneath the plume. The little girl threw her arms around Ivis and hugged him tightly.
Promise you will never go away, Father. Like the stars, I need your light to shine upon me forever.
The king lifted his daughter in his arms and turned to face the open ocean. The sun was setting far out on the horizon, and in the cobalt blue vault of twilight above, several of those same stars glittered and beckoned.
Don't have me make promises I cannot keep, little one. Nothing lasts forever, not even the stars. Please don't fret though, Ophelia. With any luck, the stars and I have plenty of tomorrows left to watch over you.
Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might, have this wish I wish tonight. The conversation you've just listened in on is prologue, an enchanted moment spent between a daughter and her loving father, said father who just happens to be the reigning king of the entire known universe. Wisdom comes with age, but then so does that rage against the dying of the light. In just a moment, we will turn a page in a book of the Imperium and set the sands of time adrift approximately 25 years into the future, to a time of awakening and enlightenment, to a time of realization. The forces of matter and energy are absolute. The space that lies between is a vacuum, devoid of light, devoid of thin air.
King Oberon kept his promise as best he could, remaining a guiding force for Princess Ophelia throughout her childhood and well on her way to fulfilling her ultimate destiny. Now she stood, looking down through a misty veil of tears as his elegant, dichoryllium-hewn coffin was being gradually lowered into a glowing preservation containment field in the royal mausoleum, his eternal resting place now on public display.
"Sleep, father,"
she whispered.
"It is your due now. You have governed the cosmos with truth and honor, and yet your empire has been such a harsh mistress to you in return. I fear now that my resolve to rule in your stead is not enough. It is but an echo of your greatness."
In the grand tradition of the Oberon lineage, Ophelia tapped her delicate fingers across the glowing digits of a holographic code keypad, entering her father's galactic identification number and sealing his remains within the containment field forevermore. Steadying herself against an ebony column that reached high into the vaulted ceiling of the sanctuary, Ophelia watched as Ivis's body was slowly spirited away down a long corridor, uplifted on a shimmering cushion of electromagnetic energy as it drifted past those that had gone on long before. Extending her free hand, she kissed the tip of her index finger and raised it above her head.
"Goodbye, father,"
she said.
"The stars and I shall now have to find our way without you."
Then, her voice trembling, added,
"You are now a part of that eternal light. Your heart still lights my way, the heart of a trillion suns, burning across all of the known and as yet unknown space. Let it never, ever be extinguished."
From somewhere in the vast, empty room behind her, Ophelia heard the muted voice of her personal handmaiden, Kindle Koblix, call out,
"My lady, we must return to the safety of the Acropolis before the throngs of subjects begin filing through these corridors to pay their last respects. Come now, make haste."
As her father's coffin reached a distant alcove and vanished behind the ornate stone recesses that were to be his chamber of the eons, Ophelia backed several steps away and turned.
"Yes."
She stammered,
"Yes, of course you're right. The reign of Ivis IV has come to an end. It is time now to prepare for my forthcoming coronation. Lead on, Kindle. I am in your trusted hands."
darkness, chaos. The wispy dregs of what was once a flaming orb of unimaginable power, now reduced to insidious decay.
It has begun.
Than exclaimed as he and his twin sister Triviod marveled over their collective handiwork, their thoughts surveying the empty blackness that now prevailed here on the fringes of the galaxy.
Yes, brother. Prophecy, the end of all light, all life. We shall bring about this eventuality and prepare this universe for the inevitable rise of our kind, albeit somewhat sooner than expected.
That the twins were indeed identical was a matter of perspective only, for only others of their race, that of the Velgons, could possibly determine this to be true. Even the concept of male and female is an abstract notion to them, at least as it pertains to the subtleties and differences of their sinister, utterly alien species. Suffice it to say that both came into existence mere moments apart, and both were formed from nearly identical matter, if in fact matter can be used to accurately describe these obscene abominations. No, not matter. Not at all. Not energy either. Nothing in terms that are indigenous to life in this universe. Thus, they are twins conceived in an alternate dimension of dark matter. Not cells nor chromosomes. For lack of a better description, they are clusters of inert mass, corruptible in part as the mass disintegrates over time, gradually mutating into something more akin to disembodied specters, a collection of pure thought, unfettered by and within the vast distances of interstellar space. It was a conscious decision made by Triviod to assume a feminine persona based upon, quote, her, end quote, studies of the Imperium and the vast diversity of alien races that comprised it. Physical beauty and skin-deep vanity had since become a singular obsession for her, a difficult state of mind for an amorphous blob to somehow come to terms with. No matter. She and her brother would soon find a matching set of suitable organic vessels to occupy, and their mission could finally commence on a grand scale.
Brooding as always.
Than said, frustrated by his sister's lack of focus and clarity.
You must think beyond the immediate. Our presence here is transient, Triviod, a stone tossed into a vast ocean. The ripples we initiate here now will someday rise as a catastrophic wave that will wash away this blight of the Imperium and cleanse another universe in pristine, never-ending nightfall.
Triviod heard her brother's persistent thoughts. Let them slither and coil around her mind like a serpent in the limbs and branches of her consciousness.
Your singular determination keeps you from seeing the way ahead, my brother. There is no moral high ground upon which I stand. We seek to bring about total chaos,
she replied.
And I shall partake in all for which that implies.
The invaders continued their collective pontifications of existence as it pertained to this new reality for another timeless moment, all the while continuing to sweep away the final dying entrails of energy and light from the dead star. It was time to move on now, time to begin the process again on the next sun, and then the next one after that. This process would continue indefinitely on and on into the farthest reaches of the cosmos, until at some point it would become self-perpetuating. All that was, or that ever will be of any significance to Than and Triviod, was darkness. Total, inevitable chaos, without limit. To that end, the twins would commit themselves to the exclusion of all else. They must, at all costs, bring about entropy, never-ending night from which rises the irreversible dawn of darkness.
The name is Nix. Captain Nix Orlan, first echelon star pilot to the Imperium and King's personal aeronaut for 13 long years, shuttling His Royal Majesty back and forth across space to all manner of exotic destinations, historically speaking. Upon King Oberon's passing, I was abruptly informed that my services to the royal family would no longer be required. Princess Ophelia Droxine Oberon's coronation signaled the end of an era for me, not due to any flaws in the execution of my duties, but rather a now unnecessary position among the staff. You see, the newly crowned Queen Ophelia was, and is, an incredibly gifted star pilot in her own right. Much to the dismay of the entire royal family, Ophelia decided to take it upon herself to get wherever it was she needed to go, near or far, by way of her own fully capable flight skills. The Queen and I did not therefore part ways under any semblance of animosity, but rather complete mutual respect. Given the opportunity, I would gladly serve as her wingman, should I ever be called upon to do so. As of this writing, said call has yet to be received, and so I find myself back here upon my home world of Niobe 4, waiting for a mission and getting considerably more reclusive all the while. Of course, solitude does have its privileges to a weary traveler such as myself.
With time on his hands and an unquenchably restless spirit, Captain Nix Orlan retired, set about undertaking the myriad tasks that had been piling up around his seldom-occupied residence for years. Most notably repairs to his ship launch platform, a long, elevated runway apparatus of his own design, spanning out from the house and facilitating both takeoff and landing of ISS Ilios, his faster-than-light tachyon drive-equipped starfighter. Niobe is a dry, arid planet with ceaseless, unrelenting winds that tend to be rather unforgiving to machinery of any kind. No machine lasts for long out in the desert without constant maintenance, and now he was dealing with the consequence of his long-term absence. Always far too hot for outdoor activities during the planet's daylight cycle, Nix crouched beneath the launch gantry in the moonlight, the cloudless, star-strewn night beckoning from above as he twisted off a cowling plate on the launch catapult assembly. Standing dutifully by his side and shining a light into the cluster of dust-caked servos beneath the plate was Orlan's trusty sidekick and all-around deadpan conversationalist, Plex, a personal assistant bot that has been rattling around the property for as long as Nix had been absent, keeping the place from becoming irreversibly unlivable.
Wow.
Plex blurted out in a characteristically monotone, synthesized voice.
Looks like you won't be go for launch anytime soon, Captain. That entire component needs to be extracted, broken down and thoroughly cleansed in a synthetic oil polymer solution. Estimated downtime, 2 solar cycles.
Flicking several large chunks of solidified crust out through the opening, Nix replied,
"You're just glad I won't be leaving you with more dirty laundry."
With a slight whirring sound, Plex's head swiveled to face him, and his electric blue eye lenses met Orlan's gaze, giving him the impression that the lights were on, but no one was home.
Laundry.
He repeated emotionlessly.
Don't you ever get tired and feel like you want to throw in the towel?
Before he could deliver the punchline, Nix interrupted with,
"No, because that'd only mean more laundry. You gotta get some new jokes, old friend. You're becoming predictable."
That would require an upgrade.
Plex responded.
And you didn't enlist my services for my razor-sharp wit.
Dim. Plex. Very, very dim.
Closing and securing the plate, Orlan stood up next to the robot and wiped his hands off on the front of his coveralls.
This'll wait. Sky is crystal clear, and I feel like going up to the observatory for a little quality stargazing. Go prop yourself in a corner and power down. I'll press restart if I need you.
As Plex slowly plodded off in the direction of the house, he called back,
Not a chance, Captain. If I even so much as set myself to sleep mode, you'll be cannibalizing me for spare parts. That said, have a pleasant evening, sir.
Not every home in the vast expanse of the Imperium comes equipped with an observatory.
Too bad.
Orlan thought.
Maybe they should. Maybe if all of us could see the big picture like I can, all worlds, all races, and all diversities could learn to function in step with one another.
He scoffed at the notion. Nix had spent far too many tense moments on some pretty hostile worlds, waiting on the tarmac or in geosynchronous orbit while King Oberon conducted negotiations for peace or tried to broker a ceasefire or two. Sometimes it worked. Oftentimes it did not.
I guess even the ability to see beyond the little ball of dirt you stand upon does not necessarily bring clarity to the cosmos. For most, the universe is that which simply swirls around inside the gray matter of individual perception. Change is inevitable. The ability to change minds, not so much.
Lost somewhere in a philosophical conundrum, Nix stepped off the lift that had delivered him to the rounded summit of his home, his looking glass to the stars. Swiping an index finger across a clear glass access panel, he engaged the heads-up display for the telescope and stood dead center in the vaulted convex chamber as the ceiling above his head spiraled out like flower petals, opening in full bloom. The view of space was breathtaking as usual. Niobe 4 may be considered an inhospitable backwater world on the fringes of the galaxy to most, but the complete lack of civilization made for magnificent stargazing. Yet another swipe of the control surface ignited a shimmering array of tiny pinpoint lights all around him, akin to standing enveloped within a field of flickering fireflies. Each brilliant node that drifted in mid-air around the room was a holographic projection of a corresponding star in the boundless heavens above. Quasars, pulsars, red giants, and white dwarfs, and a billion binary suns with plenty of Class M planets drifted in a silent pirouette, each updated in real time by sensor probes transmitting data back across hyperspace. The glass panel he had used to activate the telescopic systems retracted dutifully down into the floor so as to not obstruct a single parsec of the overall projection. Now completely voice-activated, the rush of knowing he could command the stars by mere words alone always gave him a bit of a god complex.
"Show me Imperious Prime, please,"
Nix instructed. Almost instantly the patterns shifted, and he suddenly found himself standing hundreds of light years away from home sweet home, looking down at what was essentially the center of the universe, not by way of a big bang, but as the political, social, economic, industrial, and cultural epicenter of all life. Everywhere.
Hard to wrap your head around, with or without that god complex.
Somewhere down there were his old digs, the royal acropolis of Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon. Whether her royal heiress was actually on or off-world was anybody's guess. The telescope was good, just not quite that good. Not to mention the airspace around her eminence was scrambled, perimeter patrolled, attack shielded, and all but invisible to the outside cosmos of prying eyes and potentially dark intentions. Losing interest in his half-hearted eavesdropping efforts concerning Her Royal Majesty's whereabouts, Nix swiped the view a few random parsecs away from Imperious Prime and sighed.
Those were most certainly the days.
He whispered to himself,
though nearly everything in the universe is fleeting. Moments, like falling raindrops, touch each of us only once and then evaporate into memory. For better or for worse, my moment is gone. All any of us can hope to do is be ready for what comes next.
Ironically, that was the precise moment that he first noticed a pulsing orange block of text projecting up near the far wall of the chamber, out at the edge of his peripheral vision. The warning didn't concern the specific quadrant he was viewing, but rather something much closer to home. An orange color code was a proximity alert, a warning of some form of stellar event taking place within the vast confines of Nix's own galactic neighborhood.
Well, what have we here?
He stated, as he reached out and swiped the message close enough to read. Before he even had the chance to wrap his head around the implications, Plex's voice crackled over the observatory comlink.
Captain, my sensors have registered an interesting spatial anomaly in Sector 731, 1.25 light-years from Niobe. The white dwarf, Loskane, is no longer emitting a heat or light signature. I'm still reading a gravitational influence, no doubt a remnant of electron degenerate matter. In effect, a black dwarf.
Frantically poring over the data that drifted before him in glowing orange relief, Nix replied,
Plex, that's only theoretical, you know. The time it would take for a white dwarf to decay to that state is longer than the age of the universe itself.
Nonetheless, Captain, that is what the data implies.
Once again, Plex's deadpan delivery of information, especially in this case, proved to keep Orlan's rising anxiety in check, while conversely giving him a sense of dispassionate regard for the situation. Either way, he was right. By the time Nix finished studying the full content of the alert data packet, there could be no doubt. Still, the appearance of a black dwarf carried with it terrifying implications. A seed planted that might one day entwine the garden of the cosmos in a bramble of shrouded entropy. Sprinting toward the lift to make his way outside, Nix scooped up a VR headset in passing and hooked it over the cusp of his ear. Then, as the elevator pad touched down on the ground floor, he blurted out,
Meet me on the flat. I need to lay eyes on this, and I'll want 2 sets.
Moments later, Plex clambered through the outer access hatch behind him and focused his attention on the sky overhead.
What are you hoping to see out here that you couldn't ascertain in the observatory?
Line of sight.
Nix replied.
In a nutshell, seeing is believing. Loskeen is faintly visible in the northern sky from Niobe, and too low to view directly out of the observatory aperture. I have to see for myself.
Plex followed Orlan into the drifting sand, already focusing his lenses toward the northern horizon, where the pinpoint light of Loskeen should have been shining down from behind a light layer of wispy clouds. Nix heard Plex's infrared, ocular servos whir as his filters slid into place, enhancing his ability to register any telltale energy emitted by the star.
I'm sorry, Captain. I see no evidence of thermal radiation from Loskeen.
Activating his VR apparatus, Nix's left eye was instantly looking out through a virtual star field, floating in real time and surrounded by a miniaturized, duplicate version of the star chart data from his observatory. The digital representation displayed within the headset tracked each star as it synchronized with the movements of his retina, glancing in vain for signs of Loskeen. Concurrently, his right eye futilely scanned the twilight heavens for physical evidence of the vanished white dwarf. There was nothing. Then, at almost the same instant, he realized that the unthinkable had undeniably happened. Plex delivered yet another emotionless bombshell.
Captain, you'd better have a look at this.
Turning in the direction of his voice, Nix saw that he was no longer focused and observing what was once Loskeen. His tarnished cadmium chassis had pivoted away and was now facing the ship launch platform, his head intently fixed on some point of interest, high above the runway.
What is it, Plex?
Orlan asked. The robot retracted the infrared filters that covered his lenses and looked back over his shoulder plate.
White dwarf. Catalog Septarian YE7. 4.7 light years distant. No sign of significant energy release. The stars are dying, Captain.
Oh dear. This is all exceedingly mundane and seemingly unnecessary, Kindle.
Ophelia lamented.
All of it. Is there no legitimate excuse that we might offer up to postpone this dreadful bore of a meeting? I'm restless today, my friend.
The Queen sat as still as she possibly could in her current state of restlessness, while a delicate makeup armature extended from the mirror of her ornate antique vanity. A tiny spray nozzle mounted on the tip of the device carefully blew a fine mist of powdered blush at her face that scattered and settled in perfectly feathered color across Ophelia's already rosy cheeks.
Better that I should be donning a flight suit and heading off to the hangar deck. Did you know that a new Ionian prototype starfighter has just been delivered to Imperious Star Command for testing? Rumour has it that this ship could be selected as a quintessential first line of planetary defence throughout the entire sector. Rumour also has it that production of this new warbird will come with a rather hefty defence appropriation. If we are to make such a costly decision, should I not see for myself if the craft lives up to all the hype?
Momentarily closing her eyes, Ophelia's automated eyeliner brushes and eyeshadow palette placed the finishing touches on and around her pristine lids, and then another tiny airbrush completed the process by carefully spray painting her lips in luxurious crimson majesty.
There,
She said sarcastically.
all pretty now for a chamber full of nearsighted astrophysicists and unobservant stellar cartographers.
Kindle glanced over at the Queen's beautiful reflection in the glass.
Your Majesty, nearsighted and unobservant are hardly terms I would use to describe the Spacing Federation. These individuals see farther than most and observe more than any other. You are fortunate to have them all as trusted advisors.
Now busying herself with donning an assorted array of unmentionables, Ophelia extended one of her long, shapely legs and slowly tugged a silken lavender stocking over it.
My dear and trusted synthetic, must you always try to convince me of something I already know? Of course, the Spacing Federation is comprised of the finest scientific minds in the Imperium. I simply fail to understand the need for all of this regalia to sit and listen to some monotonous diatribe over gravitational fluctuations or potential asteroid deflection contingency planning. It's all so tediously dull.
Ophelia finished putting on her other stocking and then fastened both with an ornate set of garters to hold them in place. As if on cue, Koblix raised a brilliantly bejeweled taffeta gown and carefully slid it down over the Queen's head.
Your father shared your disdain for the trappings of aristocracy. Given the choice, he greatly preferred an unadorned pressure suit and space helmet to a uniform encrusted with medals and badges of honor. You remind me so much of him.
Ophelia threaded her arms through the long, shimmering sleeves of the gown, and then let the rest slip gracefully down around her hips and legs.
I miss him terribly, Kindle,
She said wistfully.
If he were here with me at this moment, I'm certain he would be quick to fabricate some plausible excuse so that he could go flying with me instead.
Koblix gently brushed the flowing fabric of the gown and adjusted every gathered seam, button hook and flourish until she was satisfied that it was perfect.
I have no doubt, Melody. Hold on to that thought. Perhaps it will serve to make your meeting more endurable. Once concluded, I shall schedule some time for you to go down to the hangar deck and check out the new starfighter.
Triviod understood the structure and essence of organic life. In a way, it was essentially a plaything to her, a formless lump of atoms and molecules which, when organized in the proper sequence, produced the basic building blocks for all that made up and occupied this universe. With nothing more than a notion, she nudged a cell here and a strand of DNA there, and by the power of thought alone, brought into existence that which would never be born, and yet lived. First a single cell, then another and another, to eventually form a cluster, a mass of microscopic goo, fragile and fleeting. In the beginning, her creations could not survive the harsh obsidian realm of space that she and her twin brother occupied, a vacuum devoid of even the most basic elements needed to sustain the life she sought to create. No matter. Life and death were of little consequence to her. When she was finished, her new life form would possess the genetic makeup to survive any hostile environment that this universe could produce. Slowly, meticulously, Triviod rearranged the material, her thoughts directing mutations at a subatomic level until they were finally able to survive and begin a process of self-propagation. She watched closely as the chain reaction multiplied, gradually branching out in intricate tendrils of virulent life, replicating itself exponentially until it had formed into something that actually had the rudimentary inklings of self-preservation, drifting on the solar wind until it could reach out and cling to the underside of a loose rock.
It lives, brother. Very soon now, I will have engineered suitable organic vessels for our life forces to occupy. These vessels will sustain us long enough to set our plans in motion, to align with those in power, and assure them that all is as it should be. The natural inevitability of entropy.
Than's mind enveloped the tiny organism and carefully studied every detail of his sister's handiwork.
Interesting.
He commented,
This creature you have so effortlessly brought into being, will it facilitate our need for clandestine interaction with the ruling powers of this universe? How will this amorphous coagulation of primordial cells be able to communicate? Will you gift it with the auditory wherewithal to voice our deceptions effectively?
Of course, Thon.
she responded.
Though perhaps not this. I consider this to be more of a means to an end. This creature will become who we are, spirits within a material world. Organic, yes, corruptible, mortal and yet still a shadow, the darkness, a part of the whole, an extension of all who walk in the light.
Than seemed satisfied with her answer.
Continue.
He urged,
I am eager to walk in the glorious darkness here, as it was on the other side. Though Triviad, do not let vanity hinder your progress. Weakness and trivialities of the flesh could lead to our collective undoing. Remain mindful as you dabble in the trappings of creation. We are not gods.
Leave me to my work, brother.
she thundered.
It requires my full concentration. You will be what I make of you, as will I. Gods or devils, Than, we shall be the harbingers of destruction. Such awesome power should be reserved for gods alone.
Than's thoughts drifted away from her then, off to most likely initiate the death of yet another aging white dwarf.
You shall wear the mask I provide to you, dear brother. Pray I do not mold you as grotesque.
Triviod's consciousness surrounded the infant life form and brooded over it.
When darkness falls, who better to recognize the veil than I? Meanwhile, I shall revel in the fire and then snuff out the embers when I have indulged my insatiable curiosity. I shall gaze upon the countless delicacies that this universe has to offer and covet that which only the light can reveal in my sight. Yes, little one, before I grace you with the ability to express yourself, I need to empower you with the means to lust after all that is beautiful.
Triviod's attention was focused on a particularly dense nodule of fertile cells that were rapidly multiplying near the center of the overall mass. As she did, the gelatinous material that surrounded the cellular cluster started reshaping itself into a transparent, microscopic orb, undulating internally as the structure grew in both size and complexity. Layers of glistening mucus encased the globulette beneath a protective film as it expanded, rippling and squirming with an incredible burst of cellular mitosis. Triviod's mind tinkered with the emerging appendage, playfully altering the pigmentation of rapidly forming tissue, first blue, then green, and then finally settling on a deep hue of luminescent crimson. She had never actually witnessed color before, but the concept was easy enough to understand and even easier to blend across the surfaces of her creation. Red would do nicely here, universally considered to be ominous and imposing. Now, approximately 20 centimeters in diameter, the new organ lay entwined in a writhing coagulation of sinuous tendrils that reached in all directions at once like a newborn longing to be held.
There now.
Triviod's telepathic thought projection stated,
Awaken.
By nothing more than a singular brainwave transmitted and received through osmosis. The message was picked up and transmitted along still evolving neuropathways until it produced an involuntary response. The outer covering parted, tearing away the viscous membrane to expose a fleshy lid. For the very first time in her long existence, Triviod looked out in wide-eyed wonder at the indescribable spectacle that was energy and light.
That didn't last long.
Plex stated dryly as the old automaton finished loading food and supplies on the rover.
How long are you staying away for this time?
Orlan uncoupled the charging cables from the power transfer dock and retracted them into the chassis of the weather-worn vehicle.
No ETA tin cup. Gonna climb up the mountain and see what a view from the Queen's telescope looks like.
Feigning a human response, Plex placed his spindly metal alloy flanges on his corroded metal alloy hips and let out a long, modulated sigh.
As if your own trustworthy robot isn't verification enough. That frosts, Captain. That really frosts.
Orlan chuckled.
Sarcasm, Plex? That's new. Dabbling in the behavioral archives again?
Plex reached up and latched a refrigerated food storage compartment on the rover, and then stepped out through the hatch, taking several steps out into the gently blowing sand.
Self-improvement does wonders for the esteem, sir. As does having my sapiens counterpart rely on my assessment of the situation.
A servo in the robot's neck whirred as Plex turned and winked a glowing digital eye.
That's everything, Captain. Safe travels, sir.
Thanks, buddy. And hey, don't think for a moment that I don't value your observations. I trust you. Implicitly. Understand. An event of this magnitude requires verification. I'm trekking out to the eastern rim for a view from on high, figuratively and literally. If what we're seeing here can be verified by Imperium hardware up there, we'll submit a report to Her Royal Eminence on Imperious Prime. If not, no harm done. Transmit aberration, or maybe atmospheric interference by magnetic storms on Niobe, could be jacking with the incoming data stream. Stars don't just die out like this, Plex, not like this. If our observations are wrong, I'm not going to go on record with Queen Ophelia as the doddering old star pilot who's long since traded his steadfast loyalty to the Imperium for aging senility. If what we're seeing proves out, however, there's a tachyon transference quay up there at the observatory, and I'll be delivering this message back to Her Royal Highness on Imperious Prime, in person.
The Imperial Starliner Esper Hyperion, a luxurious deep space transport craft employed by the Royal Galactic Star Corps to facilitate tachyon transference to Imperious Prime, gracefully broke from geosynchronous orbit around planet Neltet 6 in preparation for the spatial jump. Ripples of flickering electromagnetic field distortion fluctuated out in a glowing wake from the tachyon engine nacelle as the vessel reached minimal safe distance from the Neltetian homeworld to activate its powerful interstellar drive. Across the leading edge of the Starliner's magnificent bow and poised behind the wide expanse of a transparent visiport glass were the pilot and co-pilot, both carefully monitoring trajectory and precise alignment for the tachyon transference to Imperious Prime. Their mission was relatively simple. Simple, and by now quite routine, the task at hand to safely deliver delegations from distant worlds of the Imperium to a formal audience with the Queen.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. At this time, we have completed the pre-flight checklist and tachyon transference is imminent. I ask that all passengers now recline and close your designated containment cubicles. Remain as motionless as possible and keep an eye on your individual heads-up display. Flight status data will provide you with instructions throughout the transition to Imperious Prime. For those of you that have not experienced a tachyon jump, you may notice a moment of mild dizziness and disorientation during disassembly, followed by peaceful sleep. I bid all distinguished delegates from Neltet 6 welcome aboard the Esper Hyperion. Our first stop will be for a course correction in close proximity to one of the crown jewels of the Queen's Imperium, the White Dwarf, Loskeen.
deep desert of Niobe 4. Harsh, unforgiving, certainly no place for the faint of heart. Nix Orlan was not faint of heart. Son of a dichiryllium miner who spent a lifetime toiling in the darkest reaches of the Niobian underground, Nix grew up here, learned at an early age that life consisted of a constant fight for survival, and that respect was a quality that must be earned through and by example. Nix knew that his family was poor, that his father gave up on his far-reaching dreams of becoming an Imperial star pilot to provide for his wife and young son as best he could. When Orlan Sr. died in a mine collapse shortly after his 18th birthday, Nix decided to take up the torch, to succeed on a grand scale in his father's stead. Orlan enlisted in the Royal Galactic Star Corps on the same day his father's ashes were cast to the Niobian wind, and as they say, the rest is history. By the time he reached 25 years of age, Orlan had been promoted to full captain, his merits and awards so illustrious that they garnered the attention of no less than King Ivis himself. Thus, he was assigned as first echelon aeronaut to the king. Nix reflected now on his impressive career as he sat staring into the flickering flames of his fire canister. Campfires were impossible on Niobe, since surface plant life was all but non-existent. Subsurface organic material was plentiful, but useless as a fire starter, and Nix preferred more efficient use of rover storage for food stores, not lugging around stacks of expensive off-world combustibles. The fire canister was a retractable extension of the rover, a convex metal pan with a hose and valve connected to the bottom that could be embedded in a sand dune and ignited with a steady burn of the rover's fuel. And so, Orlan's thoughts drifted away in the flickering flame, far off from the dark desert plateau, to wander aimlessly through the far-flung places and times of a life well lived. Near and far, he had traveled the boundless reaches of the universe with King Oberon. Now, at the ripe old age of 67, he had seemingly been put out to pasture.
Well, no. Arid desert, as the case may be.
Nix had no intention of ever returning to royal service. That wasn't what he was trekking across this inhospitable landscape to do. Every bit as much a scientist as a white-hot rocket ace, Orlan was genuinely interested and in no small way concerned about the enigma that was Loskeen. All at once, Nix heard a soft trilling from somewhere beyond the dim glow of firelight. He knew what it was, knew exactly the danger he was in. Trill gnats, diminutive desert-dwelling arachnoids whose sting delivers a more lethal dose of deadly venom than any other creature in the Imperium. Nix could hear them skittering to and fro in the loose sand and pebbles on the fringes of the light, their lidless black almond-shaped eyes staring unemotionally back at him from the gloom.
Damn it,
he exclaimed.
This is a bit of a tight spot.
Orlan figured he was already completely surrounded. Even the protective confines of the rover were out of reach at the moment, on the other end of the fire canister hose that was now crawling with a carpet of death.
Good evening, fellow Niobians. How can I help you?
Of course, no response was forthcoming. Only the soft shifting of sand beneath hundreds of entwined, scurrying legs, held at bay by a single flame from Orlan's fire. Even that was a temporary solution, a barrier that would only prove effective until the trill gnats realized that it posed no threat to them.
I wish you guys blinked,
Nix stated dryly.
It's not polite to stare.
On an evolutionary scale, trill gnats were far more evolved than other comparable eight-legged species. Not that any trill gnat has ever expressed interest in opening a dialogue and making first contact. They have, however, evolved beyond a simple hive mind to a point of developing a rudimentary belief system, a prehistoric sense of a trill gnat deity worthy of their fear and collective worship. Orlan knew this. From the time he was a child, Nix's father had shared plenty of stories about encounters with trillnats in the Dicorillium mines. Digging and drilling through the subterranean crust did, on numerous occasions, result in the unintentional destruction of a trillnat hive and subsequent minor mortalities. Trillnat swarms were horrific to behold if, in fact, any witnesses were left alive in the end. As Dicorillium supplies diminished from Niobe, some kind of lasting solution had to be found. Widespread extermination of trillnat colonies was considered a viable option by mining company executives, but planetary activists intervened, citing dangerous and irreversible changes to the Niobian ecosystem. They argued that trillnats are an emerging and potentially intelligent life form. Long story short, wiping out vast, untold numbers of trillnats was considered unacceptable and inhumane. Somehow, Dicorillium miners would have to figure out a way to live and let live. Turns out, the answer was far, far simpler than expected. No pathway to permanent extinction, just a scarecrow fashioned out of ink. Tattoos. Once it was discovered that an oversized or over-exaggerated trillnat likeness of any kind was consistently frightening to them, many of the miners decided to permanently adorn their skin with artistic trillnat depictions. Usually quite garish, appalling and always much larger than life. All of a sudden, trillnat attacks around the globe seemed to be rapidly dropping off to nothing. Over time, mining corporations came to realize that the illustrations never failed to frighten the creatures away and eventually made it mandatory for every employee to have one. Widespread tattooing ensued planet-wide, and Niobe became a mecca for artists with a knack for inking realistic interpretations of trillnats. Problem solved. And so, as the clusters of deadly creatures advanced into the light, Orlan decided that it was time to display his own stunning masterpiece. Quickly peeling off his shirt, Nix turned to face the fire and started stomping his way around the fringes of the swarm. There, prominently etched from shoulder blades to low back, was Nix's frighteningly realistic trillnat tattoo.
Sorry to spoil your plans, you little dung gobblers. Say hello to Granddaddy Longlegs, supreme being of all trillnats. He's got my back, and I know for sure that he looks very, very displeased.
Extinguishing his fire canister, Nix started retracting the hose along the leading edge of retreating arthropods and stowed it away beneath the rover.
Nothing to see here,
he said, as the trillnats scattered and fled in all directions.
Move along.
Nix exhaled a long, slow sigh of relief and allowed himself a crooked little smile.
There goes that old god complex again.
Reassembly of a solid object from a tachyonic particle stream is essentially instantaneous, a completely automated process calculated and predetermined by computer, far in advance of the actual spatial transference. To the passengers and crew of the Esper Hyperion, nothing more than a wake-up call at the end of a short nap to re-emerge, refreshed on some far-flung world, either destination or connecting port of call leading to anywhere in the universe. Loskeen was one such place, a shimmering star that shined out like a distant lighthouse on the shores of the galaxy, a beacon to light the way to Imperious Prime. At least, that is what the crew of the good ship Esper Hyperion expected to see as they awoke and stared disbelievingly out at the immense black silhouette that had once been a fiery white dwarf.
Ours is not to reason why,
the pilot stated dispassionately,
into the valley of public relations.
In the opulent guest accommodations below, Neltetian delegates Amber and Corona Chromaticus each emerged from their respective staterooms to greet what was supposed to be the morning. At least, what they had both come to expect as sunrise on a well-traveled thoroughfare such as this. So when the outer hull panels that shielded the grand vista of the observation lounge were retracted to reveal nothing but inky blackness beyond, both immediately feared the worst. Almost as if on cue, a soft, melodic tone from the ship's public address node broke the silence and provided an alarming confirmation to their suspicions.
Honoured delegates, by now I'm quite sure you've noticed that there is something amiss. An unprecedented stellar event has apparently transpired here, and the star Loskeen has seemingly been extinguished. As per Imperial mandate, we are required to remain here for a time to take sensor readings and conduct an initial investigation of the phenomenon. On behalf of the crew and myself, we apologize for this unexpected delay and greatly appreciate your understanding and patience in this matter. Of course, we will endeavor to keep this delay as brief as possible and be back underway in no more than one solar day, still allowing more than enough time for arrival before your designated audience with the Queen. We ask that you please remain calm, enjoy your bountiful continental breakfast, and partake in the many amenities that the Esper Hyperion has to offer. We will be back underway as soon as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Well, that seals it. Loskeen is no more.
Nix gently tapped the clarity and magnification adjustments of the powerful Imperial telescope, several increments closer, then waited for a cluttered mosaic of finite pixels to disperse into a crystal-clear image of the gargantuan lifeless cinder.
Still unbelievable,
he lamented.
And I thought I'd seen just about everything.
Orlan took a few more moments to compose a detailed message that he would include with his observations, then compressed the entire report into an encrypted archive. He then swiped his wrist across the observatory's data transfer port, writing the file to organic memory that resided safely within his person.
Time to drop in on an old friend.
Life forms on the surface of Loskeen. That's ridiculous.
See for yourself, Captain. The signal is faint, but I'm definitely picking up 2 distinct life signs on my long-range scan. Topographical reading has them at an elevation of 804,672 meters. Azimuth 2.5 degrees.
Captain Zebulon glanced at the 3-dimensional depiction of Loskeen that hovered silently between her contoured command chair and that of her co-pilot. Sure enough, 2 tiny green blips clearly registered on the map, apparently clinging to the charred summit of what was once a mammoth, outstretched solar flare. The towering, sinuous monolith that once erupted as a superheated column of intense radiation now stood as a cold, lifeless sentinel rising up from the blackened surface of Loskeen. The fiery plasma must have somehow instantaneously snuffed out at the apex of the ejection, leaving in its death throes a charred serpentine arch of vaulted rock formations.
How close can we get to that?
Zebulon asked as she started calculating a possible safe trajectory. Daystrom, the co-pilot, examined the flickering hologram closely.
We don't even know if that material is stable, Captain. I certainly wouldn't attempt a landing. All things considered, Loskeen's gravity is most likely hard at work on a total collapse. For that matter, we don't even know the nature of the life forms that are hanging on up there. I recommend caution.
The captain drummed her fingers on the arm of her chair.
It's a certainty that whoever or whatever is out there can't possibly survive for long. How about a remote rescue? We can use a drone, guide it out to within several meters of their position. With any luck, they will grab on and we can bring them aboard.
Daystrom inhaled sharply and slowly shook his head.
Search and rescue is not within the bylines of our mandate, Captain. We altered course to investigate this strange phenomenon. We've done that, taken readings, collected samples, and stored the data for study. I will not, however, sanction the retrieval of an unknown, aberrant biological entity. Far too risky, in my opinion.
Noted.
Zebulon replied.
I appreciate your candor, Mr. Daystrom. Though in all honesty, I cannot in good conscience leave a pair of living organisms to perish here. Not only that, is it not possible, moreover, highly likely that these aberrant entities, as you call them, might actually possess insight concerning what has happened here?
Daystrom scratched his chin and then pointed a finger at the blips on the display.
You wanted my recommendation, Captain Zebulon. I have given it to you. You are in command of the Esper Hyperion, so what you do with said recommendation is at your discretion, of course. For the record, though, the official record, it is not a good idea.
As the euphoric effects of tachyon transference gradually worked at reassembling Nix's mind and body like subatomic sand flowing through an hourglass, he saw that he was no longer standing in the conveyance quay on Niobe. Here now, he was back on Imperious Prime, propped up in one of many identical tachyon receptacles in a central transport depot, looking out through a haze of blue-green afterglow that always accompanies the disassembly and reassembly process. As Nix stepped out through the plexiglass cylinder, across an opulent mezzanine and out into the bustling central boulevard, he took a moment to pause and enjoy the vista. Capella, the capital city, was always a magnificent sight to behold, the grandest metropolis in all the Imperium. Gleaming glass and silver towers, giant holographic billboard advertisements, humans, synthetics, and a myriad of off-worlders from every corner of the universe. And above it all, the Acropolis. Nix knew every nook and cranny of the royal residence, from subsurface bunker to the highest rampart. He had attended secret briefings in the strategic war room, launched, flown, and commanded all manner of space-worthy vessels from fighter to juggernaut. He walked the hallowed halls, offering counsel, encouragement, and protection to none other than the king of the known universe himself. His excitement tempered by years of military discipline, Orlan knew that he couldn't possibly drop in on her majestic royalness, covered in a thick layer of Niobian sand and filth.
A shower, maybe a shave. Yeah, first order of business, find the nearest hotel, check in, and get cleaned up. Couldn't hurt to catch a couple of hours pounding a pillow. They say you sleep during conveyance. I'm not so sure.
Several minutes later, he had checked in and was code-keying the door to his room. The accommodation certainly wasn't spacious by any means, but the bed looked comfortable enough, considering that Nix was used to spending his wandering nights sleeping on a dune in the wide-open desert with a rock for a pillow under his head. Completely exhausted, he tossed his clothing in a chair, quickly showered, and promptly collapsed on the bed, instantly falling fast asleep. As Nix lay there sprawled out peacefully on his back and lightly snoring, he failed to notice a slight rustling sound coming from a pocket of his pants. The tattered fabric rippled for a moment, and then the cusp of the pocket gradually lifted. Nestled within the opening and cautiously examining the darkened room was a trillnat, apparently having ended up there during the blind panic of the Niobian desert encounter. This unwitting passenger had then been unintentionally abducted and subsequently whisked away to a place that was, to a desert-dwelling trillnat, completely unrecognizable. Slowly unfurling each of its long, black, sinuous legs, the tiny creature pulled its bulbous head free of the pocket and then quickly skittered down the pant leg to the floor. Drawn to the rhythmic sound of Nix's snoring, the trillnat crossed the distance to the bed and then clung to the sheet, tucking its body down against the fabric as it silently inched up the side of the mattress. Ophelia's garden oasis was her safe place, a refuge to escape, at least for a few fleeting moments, from the sometimes overwhelming responsibilities of her position. As a reminder of the cherished moments from her childhood, the lush grounds included a vast saltwater aquarium, fashioned to closely resemble the tidal pools she had once explored with Ivis. The illusion was complete in every detail. up to and including an intricately carved granite statue fashioned to resemble King Oberon exactly as she chose to remember him, kneeling down with arm outstretched, pointing out some new wonder beneath the mill-pond surface of the water for her to dream about. As she gracefully walked along the pristine cobblestone pathway, meandering around the edge of the pool, she noticed movement in the dew-laden fronds of a Danubian philodendron, a diminutive and elusive little cruquill that she herself had brought here from off-world and populated her particular corner of paradise with. Carefully reaching out, Ophelia gathered the wee lizard up between her thumb and index finger and let it nuzzle against her palm, where it promptly curled up comfortably in the warmth and closed its luminous, oversized eyes. The moment reminded her of Ivis and how he had emboldened her to be fearless in the face of the unknown, to reach out rather than shrink away from that which seems alien upon first impression. His tutelage had served her well over the ensuing years. Now she needed to be reminded of this more than ever. Her meeting with the Spacing Federation had been alarming, to say the least. In the exact words of her trusted scientists, no less than 10 stars in the distant outlying boundaries of her own galaxy were now inexplicably extinguished, the only telltale evidence of trespass, an unusually dense presence of dark matter and subsequent dark energy that appeared to be repelling against the gravity of what were now all black dwarfs, the stuff of science fiction. Momentarily disoriented, Ophelia steadied herself on the shoulder of Ivis's statue and closed her eyes, waiting a moment for the dizziness to pass.
Oh, Father, if only you were here for me now, a moment of counsel and nothing more.
When she finally did manage to open her eyes again, the first thing she saw was Ivis's reflection in the water. She smiled down at him then, calmed by the vision, even though it was only an artist's impression chiseled in stone. Then, unexpectedly, the statue appeared to wink back at her. She realized that the simple act of touching the statue did, at her own request, activate what was essentially a computer-generated avatar of him, a three-dimensional projection of masterful artificial intelligence that could walk around the garden and even converse with her about days gone by. The result of actual human engrams provided by the king long, long ago, the projection was almost but not quite a virtual clone of him, able to simulate that which could no longer be, for a short while anyway. Ophelia watched as the likeness stood up like a disembodied spirit, rising out of the stone figure to turn and face her.
It's good to see you, dearest. Shall we take a short walk together?
The Queen turned away and stepped back up to the path.
Not this time, Father.
The hologram followed after her, with even the sound of his footsteps lovingly replicated to complete the illusion. Ophelia saw Ivis step up in front of her and look down at the cruquill she still held cradled in her hand.
Always ready to extend a helping hand. You have such a kind heart, Ophelia Droxine.
Indeed,
she replied.
And now I fear that this heart of hearts, the very one you refer to that I wear quite so evidently upon my sleeve, can no longer bear the weight of what the Spacing Federation has warned to be nothing short of a looming, universal catastrophe. As a simulation, your awareness most certainly extends into Federation databanks. You know everything I now know. If ever I needed your advice, Father, now is the time.
The glowing spectre of Ivis took several steps away from Ophelia and sighed.
I can no longer provide counsel to you, my dear, not even if I wanted to. This device that so lovingly replicates my likeness is not me. It's a machine. Oh, sure, it looks as though I stand before you now. It remembers all my words, draws conclusions based upon my past decisions and actions. In the end, however, it is only wishful thinking, a notion, an errant wish. Do not seek out wisdom that is, as it is clearly labeled, artificial. I can pretend to be your father, most effectively it would seem. I have every one of his memories of you. I know how much he loved and cared for you, because his human engrams are a component of my makeup. I am a copy, Ophelia, an old photograph that you can gaze upon in the garden of your memory. If there is a part of your father that lingers here still, a ghost that defies the laws of a spiritual realm to hold his daughter's hand throughout all time, then so be it. Know this, however, that ghost is not me. All I can counsel you on is this. I can tell you what I think he might have said, if he were really here.
The likeness of King Oberon slowly turned away and walked back to the water's edge, where he then crouched down in the same pose as the granite sculpture, flickered momentarily, and then faded away. A gentle breeze blew across the surface of the man-made tidal pool and caused the water to lap against the rocks near where Ophelia was standing. Carried in the wind that caressed her face and tasseled her hair, she heard Ivis say,
"My words were intended to encourage you, dearest, not to define you. Remember, you are the queen of all the known universe now. A good one too, I'll wager, wise and fair. Of this fact, there can be no room for doubt. I was proud of you then. I am proud of you now. Be brave. Press on. You have all you will ever need."
A tear fell from Ophelia's cheek and lightly splashed across the back of the crouquill she still held, curled up in her outstretched palm.
"You're here, Father, holding my hand after all,"
she stated quietly as she reached out and placed the tiny lizard on a nearby branch. Then, with both hands cupped together over her heart, she said,
"Always."
The trillnat placed each of its 8 slender jointed legs in turn as it lightly stepped along the curving contours of Orlan's muscular chest, careful not to disturb the sleeping man's slumber. Little by little, the fist-sized arachnoid crawled up to and then carefully across his face, finally crouching down on Nix's forehead, with legs wrapped firmly around his cranium. As the creature settled itself along the fringes of Orlan's hairline, it slowly extended a pair of needle-thin antennae until they reached out and around the curve of his head to the base of his skull, inserting through the soft flesh covering his brain stem. Motionless now, the trillnat proceeded to implant itself telepathically into Orlan's subconscious mind, establishing what was to become a symbiotic link between 2 radically different Niobian life forms. Within the misty regions of what had been peaceful, undisturbed REM sleep, Nix started to dream. At first, abstract, meaningless forms drifting to and fro as his neurons fired, assembling a vision that was being imagined by the distinctly different, uninvited mind. Nix saw himself lying on the bed in the very same hotel room, a view from above that seemed to him to be a bona fide out-of-body experience. Towering over him and poised ready to strike was an enormous trillnat, an oversized nightmare version of what Nix considered to be a pint-sized, desert-dwelling freak of nature. As the dream state started to coalesce in his mind, Nix's disembodied presence in the room drifted down from omnipresent spectator to first-person perspective, and he suddenly found himself looking up into the cold, emotionless eyes of the beast. Now, awake or asleep, Nix didn't scare easily, for that matter typically not in the least. Rather than shrinking away from the encroaching vision, Orlan simply folded his arms behind his head and glared back at it, unfazed.
"No question about it,"
he exclaimed.
"I must be dreaming. Either that or you've been kicked into a vat of hyper-accelerated growth hormones. What are you supposed to be anyway? Lord of all dung gobblers?"
The trillnat tipped its bulbous head in what seemed to be confusion or surprise. Then Nix heard it speak to him.
"Interesting. Are you not at all threatened by my imposing persona, Nix Orlan?"
Nonchalantly, Nix replied,
"Not particularly. Now, if you'd have come at me life-sized in the dream, you'd have been pretty convincing. This? No. Every Niobian knows that giant trillnats don't exist. I do have a few questions for you, though. For starters, Why am I dreaming about Trillnats? You're not really here on Imperious Prime with me, are you?
Yes, I am.
The arachnoid responded,
Outside your dream, I am resting comfortably affixed to your forehead.
Okay, now that's disturbing.
Nix exclaimed,
I hope you're not messing up my hair. How the hell did you get here? Wedged in my butt crack like a misplaced dirt clod?
The Trillnat's immense size slowly diminished in the dream, down to something much closer to actual scale.
That's even more disturbing.
It responded,
No, not your butt crack. Pocket of your pants, thankfully. Now that our minds are fused, I understand that I have traveled here with you using a process known as tachyon transference. I have never been off-world before. It is a new experience for me.
Yeah, well, having you creepy crawling around the folds of my gray matter is a new one for me too. If you'll excuse me, I'm gonna pinch myself, wake up, and go about the business of ripping you off of my scalp and flushing you down the toilet in my bathroom. Nothing personal. Just not overly fond of Trillnats.
The arachnoid stretched out its front legs, extending them away from its body to reveal a long, razor-sharp stinger, the tip of which was poised against Orlan's flesh.
The feeling is mutual. You forget, Captain Orlan, I still have the upper hand. Please, allow me another moment in this dream of yours to explain. All I want is to return home. As long as you and I have an understanding, I see no reason to harm you. As for getting me out of your mind, this is something only I can do. You may pinch yourself, but you will not awaken until my antennae have been removed from inside your gray convolutions. Flushing me is unadvisable as well. Now that you and I are symbionts, we can both see everything through each other's eyes. You may not wish to view the content of a sludge-encrusted sewer firsthand. And oh, one last item before I allow you to awaken. We can only speak to each other in this manner, telepathically, while you are sleeping. Until you return me to the homeworld you call Niobe, I am your passenger. Our association during this time should prove to be interesting. To my knowledge, no human has ever joined with my kind. Historically speaking, our mutual encounters don't typically end well. Perhaps you and I have an opportunity to change that. We shall see.
Nix sighed heavily, resigned to accept the presence of his newfound traveling companion.
Fine. We have an accord for now, you little fecal feaster. No promises, though, just my word that I won't squish you under my boot before I can get you back to the desert. It'll be a while, though. Since you're along for the ride, you should know that we're planning on an unscheduled audience with Queen Oberon. We're gonna drop in completely unannounced and uninvited to have ourselves a little chit-chat about something much bigger than Trillnats. Do me a favor while we're there, though, would you please? Keep your antennas to yourself.
As the epoch of Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon gradually set in across the universe, countless citizens of the vast Imperium barely noticed. Not that she was proving to be an ineffective ruler. On the contrary, the smooth transition of power was due in no small part to not tampering with Ivis's stewardship of the cosmos, not even so much as a modicum from her father's far-reaching policies and edicts. The Queen saw no reason to do so. Like his father before him, the late King Oberon had managed to put plenty of systems and safeguards in place to assure universal prosperity and individual freedom of expression to the untold masses throughout his far-flung kingdom. Even the vile blight of racial inequality had been long ago extinguished in favor of universal expansion and the promise of cultural diversity, ultimately paving the way to new social and economic possibilities. Plentiful production and distribution of natural resources translated to contented and faithful subjects, for the most part, the only exceptions being rare uprisings and poorly organized coups, attempts that were quickly quelled by the strong arm of what was now Her Majesty's First Echelon Stellar Armada. And so it goes. For all the grandiose trappings that went with the position and title, several necessary duties of the office were most certainly not to her royal liking. Of particular disdain, conducting royal audience with a never-ending stream of planetary representatives anxious to gain the Queen's boundless favor by way of extravagant gifts and cultural offerings. As the Baron and Baroness of Altair Vega bowed, curtsied, and then gracefully stepped down from her raised throne platform, Ophelia sighed under her breath. Remaining behind on the rostrum was her gift, an elegantly adorned symbol of utmost regard by the peoples of that world. An Altarian fawn, a kind of exotic-looking baby deer, stared up at Ophelia with large, luminous eyes, probably wondering what happens next and why its plush pelt had been so meticulously braided and garishly hand-painted for the occasion. The Queen allowed a slight smile as she returned the little animal's innocent gaze, moments before her handmaiden gathered it in her arms and gently ushered the Altarian offering away to Her Majesty's zoological habitat, there to join every other Altarian fawn already in residency. Ophelia extended her palm over her head then, momentarily pausing the procession of other-worldly attendees still waiting their place in line to see her. Once her handmaiden Kindleco Blix returned to stand beside her, the Queen allowed herself a lingering glance down the long aisle, and was relieved to discover that only 2 more alien representatives remained to be granted audience.
Kindle, my dear,
Ophelia whispered.
I find of late that your Majesty's royal buttocks are in considerable distress.
Kindle suppressed a laugh.
I'm assuming,
she chided.
That's a politically correct way of saying that these proceedings are a royal pain in the ass. It's no secret to me, milady. Tedious would be a grievous understatement.
The Queen groaned.
Oh well.
She murmured.
2 more gracious tributes, and I'm off to fly the new starfighter for the remainder of the day. Agreed?
Kindle grinned politely and then turned to stand at attention so the proceedings could continue.
Agreed, milady,
she replied.
Therapy for the royal buttocks.
Ophelia giggled under her breath and then gestured for the next pair of delegates to ascend the stairs and approach the throne. Amplified many times over by the voice resonator in her podium, Coblix glanced at the remaining guest list attendees displayed on her transparent, handheld visiplate and announced,
Fanon Trivia, distinguished guests of planet Nelted 6, draw near now and be heard.
On cue, the impeccably attired humanoid couple strode their collective way, arm in arm, up the long, curving staircase leading to the Queen's transparent glass pulpit. Ophelia had visited the planet Neltet 6 countless times as a child, along for the ride, as it were, with her father's entourage, however, was never granted access to the populace. Such was Ivis's concern for her protection. Never had she actually spoken to a Neltesian native face-to-face, and here now, this inevitable opening dialogue seemed to be provoking an uncomfortable sense of nameless dread as the incredibly tall, gaunt, bluish-grey figures approached her. Upon stepping out across the landing, both extended a perfectly rehearsed greeting, the female of the species sashaying down into a wide, elegant curtsy, while the male extended an adequately proper bow.
Rise,
Ophelia instructed.
I bid you both welcome to Imperious Prime.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Than replied respectfully.
It is indeed an honor to stand in your glorious presence.
Triviod added. Straightening up, she looked directly at the Queen and was secretly amused to notice a subtle wave of revulsion in Ophelia's expression. She hoped it was a reaction to the eyes. Large, liquid and glowing, a diabolically luminous blood crimson. Triviod was particularly proud of how they seemed to so easily instill fear in all who met her gaze.
The honor is mine.
The Queen responded.
To what end have you and your brother travelled so far to address me?
Consistently impetuous when it came to matters of state, Than reached out his long, spindly fingers and took hold of Ophelia's hand, kissing it lightly and redirecting the Queen's focus of attention away from his sister.
"Religion, my lady,"
he stated politely.
"With your permission, Triviod and I stand before you now to propose the establishment of a new theological order within the vast reaches of your Imperium. We feel that so much importance has historically been placed upon the abstract notion of a higher power in the universe, a god, if you will, and that there should be a system of checks and balances put into play that offers, say, an alternative to the forces of energy and light. That is to say that we, Triviod and I, do not subscribe to these time-worn doctrines. Ours is to embrace and acknowledge the opposing forces, diametric as they are most commonly perceived, largely and or historically feared. I speak of darkness, of entropy."
If Ophelia had been sensing an aura of primal dread based upon appearances alone, the tension brought on by this unusual interaction just ratcheted up several more notches.
"Entropy,"
she exclaimed.
"My dear Neltetians, how can a system of belief possibly be founded in such a concept? To embrace a gradual decline into chaos, and what? To encourage the ultimate running down of the stars? No, you shall not have my blessing to assemble an order of entropy. While I cannot stop you from conducting what I assume to be your twisted rituals and rites in secret, you shall not have dispensation from the House of Oberon to set about so unthinkable a goal, to say nothing of recruiting others to follow your awful cause."
Triviod glared with vile contempt at her brother's look of absolute disbelief, infuriated at his choice of words and failure to effectively communicate their cause with subtlety.
"My lady,"
she said, turning to face the Queen.
"Surely my brother's misplaced choice of words will not undo our efforts to—"
Ophelia interrupted, indirectly speaking to Kindle, who was listening by her side in wide-eyed disbelief.
"Kindle, my dutifully trusted advisor. Confirm something for me, can you please? Are not the native inhabitants of Neltet 6 essentially a race of agnostics? If memory serves, my father once told me that nowhere else in the entire cosmos did he encounter a more indecisive species when it came to matters of existential dogma. Yet here we are, in the apparent company of two very religious zealots."
Ophelia clicked her tongue on the roof of her mouth.
"I am therefore confused. Tell me, Than, Triviod, what miraculous epiphany has so radically transformed two beings who believe in nothing?"
Than's bluish cheeks flushed a more vibrant hue as he sank back from the throne, visibly embarrassed and unable to respond. Triviod decided to seize the moment.
"My brother is a fool, Your Excellency. Even I have trouble believing his delusional ramblings sometimes. Entropy is a very, very strong word. Too strong in the context of our request. As you are no doubt aware, the universe is not entirely made up of your precious, fiery orbs of light. In so much as there is matter and energy, so too there is dark matter. No less than 85% of all that exists is made of such matter. We embrace this inevitability, simply choosing to ignore that which cannot be seen, categorized, or detected contradicts all who place their faith in something invisible. Than and I have been off-world and away from Neltet 6 long enough to be influenced by outside forces."
Grinning with a final thought to cap off her soliloquy, she added,
"You might say our eyes have been opened."
Placing an outstretched hand on Than's shoulder, she tugged forcefully enough that he nearly stumbled and fell backwards from the pulpit.
"Come, Than. We have taken up enough of Queen Oberon's valuable time."
Closing her eyes and bowing her head, Triviod softly stated,
"Your Majesty, with your permission, we now take our leave of you."
Ophelia politely returned the gesture. Though just beneath the surface of her forced, calm demeanor, she fought to restrain the persistently nagging impression of fear. She couldn't put her well-manicured finger on precisely what it was, but the Queen knew that there was something not quite right about the pair.
"Farewell, Than and Triviod. Safe passage for your conveyance home.
Thank you, Your Majesty,
Than said in a weak, resigned tone. Then once again Triviad spoke up with a bold wave of her hand, carefully lifting a glittering necklace from around her neck and placing it on the floor in front of the throne.
A gift, my queen. Though our mission here has not succeeded, let this be a reminder of just how determined is our resolve.
With that, Triviad reached out and grabbed her brother's arm by the wrist and literally dragged him kicking and stumbling down the stairs from the platform.
Imbecile!
She shouted at him.
We needed the support and approval of the queen. Your complete lack of oratory shall be our undoing.
Several times on their way from the throne room to the Grand Rotunda outside, Ophelia could clearly hear Than crying out in pain as Triviad repeatedly kicked and slapped him in rout.
Oh dear,
She exclaimed.
that was an awkward departure.
Kindle scoffed.
To be sure, my lady, most unruly. Should I alert the guard to escort them off the Acropolis grounds?
Ophelia cupped her hand over her mouth for a moment and considered the threat level.
No, I don't believe that to be necessary. It almost borders on immaturity, Kindle. They're like a pair of impudent children, hardly candidates to organize and lead a new religious order.
Turning to face Kindle, she asked,
Isn't it odd, though?
What's that, my lady?
Koblix responded.
Oh, I don't know. Perhaps it's nothing. We've had a long day of this, my friend. Paranoia exacerbated by fatigue. Still, I visited Neltet 6 many times with my father. Though I was never permitted to mingle with the populace, not once on any of my myriad travels there do I recall noticing, even from afar, a Neltetian native with red eyes.
The Queen's observation hung unresolved in silence for a moment as she removed one of her satin gloves and reached down to retrieve the necklace Triviad had left there for her. Holding the beautiful trinket up to examine, she saw that it was a flawlessly formed black pearl, encircled within a ring of ornate silver flames, a finite representation of a dead sun.
If I didn't know better,
She went on.
It's almost as though the twins were somehow possessed.
You are a fool, Than.
Triviad said as she dragged her brother along by his Neltatian arm, through the opulent throne room doors, past a crowd of paparazzi and surprised onlookers, and finally out into the vast courtyard of the Acropolis.
Your arguments were not convincing in the least, as I predicted. I gave you a mouth, and yet you cannot speak. Damn you for even making the attempt.
Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, she pulled Than through a space between two sculpted topiary hedges and down into a shallow ravine on the outer edges of the garden terrace. Once they were sufficiently hidden beneath a canopy of trees, Triviad slapped her brother across his possessed body's face, hard enough to send him careening to the ground.
Fortunately, my foresight will make up for your ineptness. If we cannot convince the ruler of this universe to permit our covenant of entropy, we shall eliminate her from the equation altogether, and in the void left behind, the ensuing absence of law and order, we will build up our new ministry of darkness. If you're lucky, dear brother, I might even consider letting you be my acolyte. That is, if you think you can hold a candle to me.
Than picked himself up off the carpet of grass and dabbed at a deep cut Triviad had slashed across his Neltatian's cheek and jaw.
Bitch. As I predicted, you have, without restraint, given in to your lust for power, material trappings, carnal urges. In a sense, you have become a disciple of all that we seek to destroy. When the time comes to snuff out the last flaming orb of energy and light from this reality you so wholeheartedly crave, will you be able to part with your precious sight? I don't need these eyes to see that you will have to be pulled kicking and screaming back to the blindness from which we originate.
A sickeningly vitreous sucking sound emulated from Triviad's temporarily borrowed corpus as she peeled herself free of Amber Chromaticus, the female Neltatian delegate, and let her lifeless shell collapse into a stand of tall grass where it would be effectively concealed, at least for the time being.
Time to shed your skin.
Than heard his sister's words echo in his mind.
Our business here is concluded.
It took Ophelia considerably less time to suit up and make her way out to the flight line than it ever did to dress up and play the part of royalty. In the time it took her to lace up a bustier, she could easily sashay to the hangar deck anonymously and, without a single sideways glance, walk past any pilot or commanding officer, all of which unknowingly answered to her. This was real freedom. Confidently striding out across the gantry and up to the fighter launch platform, she offered a proper salute to one of the ground crew personnel on duty and then sprinted the remaining distance to what was now an entire row of recently delivered Ionian SF-47 starfighters. Christened by none other than the Queen herself, Ophelia had dubbed the sleek new warbird the Cygnus, inspired by her lifelong fascination with the singularity there from which there is no escape, not even for light.
Apropos,
She stated quietly to herself as she stood admiring the impressive ship. Stepping up to one of the long, silver-plated sweep wings, she held out her hand and slowly ran her fingers across the flawless, gleaming surface.
So impressive. Beautiful, yet very, very deadly.
Much like your Royal Highness herself.
Startled, Ophelia turned her attention overhead to the open cockpit, up in the direction of what seemed to be a vaguely familiar voice. Seated on the lip of the open canopy airlock was a ruggedly handsome old man, dressed head to toe in a perfectly outfitted Royal Aeronaut flight suit. Of course, she recognized him instantly.
Nix?
She exclaimed disbelievingly.
Nix Orlan.
The one and only.
Orlan said, smiling as he climbed down from his lofty perch and embraced her.
It's good to see you, Your Majesty. How's that whole universal rule thing going?
Ophelia hugged the old man tightly.
Oh, Nix. You have no business calling me Your Majesty. Please, to you I will always be Beetlejuice.
Pulling off her space helmet, Ophelia shook her head gracefully side to side, letting her bright red hair fall out around her neck and shoulders.
See? A queen, regal, commanding, and yet your nickname for me still fits. Beetlejuice.
You really have no idea why I called you that, do you?
Nix asked.
I know it has something to do with my red hair.
Ophelia replied.
Someone else you know with crimson locks, perhaps?
Orlan chuckled.
Well, sort of. I called you Beetlejuice because your head reminded me of a red giant star. Fiery and somewhat oversized, at least when you were a kid. Not so much now.
Ophelia feigned a look of absolute insult.
Red giant indeed,
she said sharply.
Had I known that, Nix Orlan, I'm quite sure I would have thought far less fondly of you.
Ophelia held her expression of indignation for as long as she could, then cracked a smile and burst out laughing. Nix chuckled along with her for a moment, and then decided that it was time to face facts and fess up to the reason for his visit.
Ophelia, not to dampen the mood of the moment, but I'm afraid this isn't just a social call. I'm here on account of something extremely unsettling that's happening out near my home world. A few light years out from Niobe. As unlikely as this might sound.
Ophelia abruptly interrupted.
The stars are burning out. Yes, Nix, I know. I was recently briefed about the situation. Terribly frightening.
The Queen turned away and leaned her elbows on the wing of the Cygnus.
Do you have any first-hand knowledge of the event?
She asked. Nix sighed.
No, Ophelia, nothing specific. That's why I'm here, though. The ruler of the known universe should have the opportunity to lay eyes on anything that might pose a threat to her vast kingdom. I didn't mention it to Plex when I left, but I figured maybe you'd like to cruise out to Loskeen with me and see for yourself. Figured if you risk it, you could use a good wingman.
Ophelia turned back to face Nix. She was smiling again.
Is Plex here with you? Kindle, my synthetic, was quite taken with him the last time they met. She still mentions him to me on numerous occasions.
Nix shook his head.
Sadly, the old rattletrap got left in the dust again. Gotta have someone to keep the home fires burning. I'm sure he would have asked to be remembered.
Oh, he's remembered all right. It's really rather touching the way Kindle fawns over him. I'm not quite sure whether it's pity or some sort of twisted mutual attraction.
Nix chuckled again, and the well-defined laugh lines deepened at the corners of his eyes.
Plex is one fine automaton, that's a fact. Maybe it's that crazy mechanical accent of his, the way he slurs his E's. Once I get back home, I'll make sure to inform him that Koblix has the hots for him. It'll make his day.
Ophelia giggled and then, conversely, paradoxically, screamed. Inching its way out from behind Nix's neck were a set of long, black, spider-like legs.
Nix!
She shouted.
What the hell is that?
Orlan felt the Trillnat crawling out from its hiding place under his flight jacket and realized he owed the Queen some sort of quick explanation.
Oh, yeah. Little difficult to explain, your Beetlejuiceness. That would be a Niobian Trillnat, one of the most deadly arachnids in the universe. No need to panic, though. He's with me, and I suppose you could say that this one has been domesticated. Don't worry, he'll be riding shotgun, in my ship.
Ophelia stared wide-eyed at the creature that was now perched fully atop Orlan's shoulder.
Indeed he shall,
she said nervously.
Well then, Trillnat or no, on to the more immediate consideration. I believe I shall take you up on your offer, Nix Orlan. Unfortunately, your status and rank have long since been retired.
Still eyeing the arachnoid cautiously, the Queen wrapped her pristinely manicured fingernails on the wing of the starfighter and said,
I'm afraid that I cannot permit you to fly one of these technological marvels without first having you reinstated as an aeronaut. For that to happen, you must have the express permission of none other than the Queen herself.
Smiling coyly, she said,
Oh, but then this is fortuitous. It seems as though you're very much in luck. Captain Orlan, welcome back.
Do you have authorization to be inside the docking bay?
As soon as the bodies of the slain Neltatian representatives were discovered, upon the very grounds surrounding the Royal Acropolis itself, a planet-wide manhunt for the perpetrator or perpetrators was immediately set in motion. In the early moments of the investigation, several disturbing details were immediately uncovered, not the least of which being the identities of the murdered pair, Amber and Corona Chromaticus, the delegates from Neltat 6. Either by blatant arrogance or reckless disregard, the unknown assassins had presented themselves to the Queen by the names Than and Triviod, neither name remotely associated with current Neltatian rule. Secondly, as a timeline of the slain delegates' whereabouts started to emerge, investigators traced their arrival on Imperious Prime back to and by way of the Esper Hyperion starliner. The vessel was promptly discovered abandoned, moored at a remote, little-used gate of the Capellian spaceport, the captain and her co-pilot dead at the helm, with their throats cut. As the threat level was elevated and security for the Queen and her staff tightened, Ophelia never knew. By the time a lockdown of the Acropolis had been put into place, 2 Ionian SF-47 starfighters had already launched with strict orders by the flight crew for radio silence and tachyon resonance tracking, disengaged. In effect, a clandestine mission into the ether, a desperate attempt by the Queen and her trusted wingman to uncover the truth behind the dying of the stars.
Okay, Beetlejuice, let's see what you got. Cygnus 1 is away.
Once Orlan's ship had cleared the launch gantry platform, Ophelia chimed into the tower as well, firing her powerful ion scramjets and sending her own ship hurling off the flight deck into the night.
Cygnus 2 is away,
she called out as the pair of Cygnus starfighters spiraled skyward like screaming silver bullets fired from a gun. As the tenuous mist of finite ionosphere swirled out from the wingtips and mingled with billowing gossamer contrails, both ships started executing a long, graceful climb and wide bank toward the vast expanse of inner rings that surrounded Imperious Prime.
Sightseeing, Orlan? Are we headed into space to look at rocks?
Up close and personal, young lady.
Nix replied.
Your dad used to take you skipping stones. Let's see if you can keep from bouncing off of any.
Ophelia giggled playfully.
Sticks and stones, Captain. Tighten your harness and see if you can keep up.
Pushing her control stick forward and right, the Queen rolled her ship into an inverse dive and headed straight on toward a particularly sizable chunk of slowly revolving, crater-pitted slag.
Oh, look, Nix! I found a pretty one,
She stated calmly.
Let's have a closer look.
Nix held a white-knuckle grip on the controls as he guided his ship along Ophelia's flight path for a very close pass of the craggy boulder, adhering as closely as he could to her seemingly reckless trajectory. Now surrounded on all sides by wildly careening bits of stone and ice, Ophelia fired off a barrage of shots from her underwing plasma cannons and blasted a clear way forward through the rubble.
Are we having fun yet?
Orlan complained over the comlink.
I'm still waiting for you to impress me with some fancy flying.
Ophelia scoffed.
Perhaps you could put your money where your mouth is and show me some, Mr. Orlan. You're supposed to be the best of the best.
With pleasure.
Nix replied.
Move over, Your Highness, I'm coming through.
Orlan ignited his powerful ion afterburner and performed a flawless barrel roll up and over the Queen's ship, close enough to salute her through the cockpit glass on the way by.
Now let's see if you can follow my lead, Beetlejuice.
As Nix's Cygnus rapidly raced out ahead and left Ophelia in his flickering wake, she heard Orlan exclaim,
How about a little background ambience?
The loud thumping of a raucous techno song started reverberating from her headset then. And somewhere in the midst of the caterwauling beat, Nix said,
Let's see how well you can thread a needle.
Engaging his braking thrusters, Orlan pushed his Cygnus into a steep dive, leading out of the planet's rings and straight on toward Melikor, largest of Imperious Prime's 9 orbiting moons. Down and down, the pair of starfighters soared in what seemed to be an unavoidable collision course. The Queen didn't shrink away from the challenge in the least. On the contrary, she knew instinctively what the old Aeronaut had in mind. Melikor possessed a very unique geological landmark that made its lifeless, crater-pitted surface quite unlike any other. It was, after all, nothing more than a lingering asteroid captured in passing, as it tumbled a little too close to Imperious Prime millions of years ago. Formed by the superheated cosmic furnace of some distant fiery nebula, Melikor had cooled on its long journey through interstellar space, with a vast volcanic vent that meandered around inside it from pole to pole.
Nix?
The Queen voiced casually into her comlink.
I suggest you pay particular attention to your close proximity of surrounding strata while, quote, threading the needle, end quote. That's a very expensive piece of hardware you're flying. I will insist upon you reimbursing the Imperium for any damages inflicted.
The Ionians didn't build these birds to be protected inside a gilded cage, kid.
Nix fired back.
Turn on your collision sensors and hold on to your butt.
Orlan's SF-47 rocketed down toward the mammoth peak of the long-extinguished volcanic vent, a glide slope calculated using a combination of the Cygnus's precise onboard instrumentation and the old star pilot's razor-sharp instinct.
Still with me, Beetlejuice?
Way ahead of you, as a matter of fact.
Ophelia chided as she gracefully passed by on his left and guided her ship into the looming vent a few meters ahead of him.
I'll be damned.
Nix murmured to himself.
Fearless as ever.
I'm assuming that this concludes our little foray into the intricacies of spaceflight?
The Queen stated smugly.
Not quite, Beetlejuice.
Orlan replied,
There's still a small matter of plotting your tachyon jump. Let's see how fast you can chart a course to Laskin. You've got just enough time until we exit this vent on the other side of Melikor. That'll be about 7 seconds from now.
My conveyance is already charted and laid in, Captain.
The Queen informed him.
Safe passage.
Ophelia's central tachyon nacelle lit up a brilliant blue-green as she roared out through the conical opening at the summit of the ash-shrouded peak and disappeared. The Trilnat crawled out of an unlocked storage compartment under the cockpit instrument panel and looked up at Nix.
No wonder the royal family gave me the boot.
Orlan said, looking down in bewilderment.
I'll swat you like a fly on the wall if you tell her I said this, but she may just be the best damn pilot I've ever known.
Then, just before Orlan initiated his own tachyon jump, He grinned at the little arachnid and added,
I know. Your lips are sealed, if you had any.
It started raining heavily as Kindle Koblik stepped free of the public transport shuttle near one of many guarded service entrances to the Royal Acropolis. Although she had been designed to register sensations of all sorts on her polymer synthetic epidermis, the feeling of raindrops pouring down from the sky and splashing upon her face and arms barely stimulated a reaction. Something else was happening, something that demanded nothing less than her full, unimpeded attention. Even considering all of the various safeguards protecting the tower and surrounding grounds, Kindle detected an incredible power surge building somewhere within the towering walls above. More specifically, within the confines of Queen Oberon's private chambers. The synthetic knew that Her Royal Majesty had been safely off-world now for hours, and yet the alarming presence of something as potentially destructive as her readings indicated still posed a significant threat to all who occupied the royal edifice. Quickly stepping up to and inside the nearest transparent lift chamber, she keyed in the restricted access code to Ophelia's lofty floors and then waited beneath the liquid distortion of spattering raindrops as the lift floated high into the cloud-shrouded darkness above. Several moments later, the platform magnetically attached itself to the side of the tower, and an outer hatch slid open with a prolonged hiss of escaping hydraulic air. Koblix didn't bother closing the opening behind her. The lingering sound of rain and thunder echoed in through the aperture in tense harmony with her own reverberating footfalls. By now, she was sprinting headlong down the long corridor at a dead run, desperately trying to reach the Queen's bedroom before the energy surge she was monitoring culminated at what would most certainly be critical mass. Flinging open Ophelia's chamber door, she immediately caught sight of a brilliantly pulsating light source situated upon the nightstand next to the Queen's bed. It was the tiny amulet given to the Queen by the Neltatian delegates Than and Triviod. The trinket shook violently as it started levitating up from the tabletop, seconds before Kindle was able to reach out and cup it in her outstretched hands. For one fleeting moment, she managed to hold onto it, and the blinding white light emulating from it was obstructed. For that one fleeting moment, then the gemstone shattered. Infinitesimal particles swirled and glittered like bioluminescent algae in a vast sea of darkness. Here, in what had become the bleakest quadrant of the galaxy, two blue-green pinpoint sparks of light suddenly flared high above the hulking, shadowy curvature of Loskin. Several microseconds later, these two tiny embers fused with other glittering tachyon particles to form the pair of rogue starfighters being flown by Queen Oberon and her wingman, Nix Orlan. As the euphoric symptom of conveyance reassembly gave way to coherent thought, Nix quickly scanned the immediate surroundings for any potential dangers and determined that at least, for the moment, the coast was clear.
Well, Beetlejuice, we're here. A little dark for sightseeing, though.
Ophelia performed a slight course correction and pulled her ship into alignment just off of his starboard wingtip.
Agreed.
Ophelia confirmed.
And furthermore, setting down on the surface of a black dwarf doesn't seem like a sound course of action either. Who knows what sort of unstable surface material we may encounter? The extinguished ingredients down there could be tenuous at best. Pockets of helium, maybe heavy carbon. Difficult to say for certain. All we have here is the remains of what was once most likely an M-class star. Probably a potpourri of elements, none of which are in any kind of stable state.
Nix chuckled dryly.
You certainly know your way around the periodic table. No table we want to shimmy up to anyway. So it looks like our only viable option is to set down on one of Loskin's satellites. Not one of them Class M, of course. Probably all quite inhospitable. 2 planets, Theta and Bethune. Both are what we refer to as disrupted planets. Survivors of Loskeen's ruinous evolution into a white dwarf. The innermost planet is Bethune. You can see it now with the naked eye, out of the cockpit glass at your 3 o'clock position.
I see it, Captain. Rather misshapen for a planet, isn't it? Hardly spherical at all.
Ophelia observed.
Well,
Nix responded,
much like myself, it's been through a lot. I may not be clinging to a dead star, but still, I've become pretty rough around the edges.
The Queen giggled.
Speaking of Klingons,
She said gleefully.
tell me more about your new pet.
Oh yeah, that.
Orlan replied, noticeably annoyed.
As I think I mentioned before, it's a Niobian trillnat. The little curmudgeons inhabit just about every square inch of Niobe's real estate. I was on my way up to one of your Imperial observatories when I found myself surrounded by a whole colony. I managed to fend off a swarm, but apparently one stray dung gobbler flipped out and in a blind panic ended up in the pocket of my pants. I gave the little bastard a first-class ticket to Imperious Prime with me.
Ophelia was amused and very, very intrigued.
So, one would think that as soon as you discovered there was a spider in your pants, you would have most likely screamed like a little girl and promptly squashed it. No?
She started giggling uncontrollably at the thought, and Nix sighed.
One would think. Turns out the little critters are symbiont. Also quite intelligent. Believe it or not, he talks to me in my dreams. When I'm asleep, I guess all he wants from me is a round trip back to Niobe. At least that's what he told me the last time I nodded off. Haven't slept since. Let's get something perfectly clear though, young lady. I've never, ever screamed like a little girl.
Ophelia continued to giggle.
Well, Nix, I'm quite sure there is a first time for everything.
More than ready to change the subject, Nix fired a short burst from his ion thrusters and locked in an intercept course with Bethune.
Come on, Beetlejuice. Let's get down there and start taking some readings. The comlink is open. If I scream like a little girl, you'll be the first to know.
Several minutes later, both Cygnus starfighters set down gently on the planet's surface, enveloped within a thick plume of powdery grey dust, kicked up by bursts of their maneuvering thrusters. As soon as his engines started spinning down, Nix activated and launched a sensor probe that he then guided out to an impact point inside a particularly fragile fissure leading deep down toward Loskeen's core. As the data started streaming back to him across his visiplate display, the Trillnat climbed out from its hiding place and crawled up on the console to silently stare at the readings that were flickering by. Still focused on the information he was receiving from the probe, Nix offhandedly blurted out,
Helix. I'm tired of calling you a dung gobbler, so I've just now decided that your name is Helix. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong the next time you go shambling through my nightmares. If Trillnats have proper names, that is.
That's so sweet, Nix.
Ophelia chided.
You've given your new pet a name.
Remembering that he had insisted on leaving the comlink open, he replied,
Yeah, he's adorable, Beetlejuice. Especially when he curls up in the folds of my collar, with his 8 long black legs wrapped around my neck. Would you like me to send him over so you can pet him?
Assuming that the radio silence that followed was her answer, Nix focused his complete attention back on what was now reading as an overwhelming presence of residual dark energy seething in and around the other inert elements that made up Loskeen's dormant crust. Then, finally, the Queen thought up an appropriate response.
Oh, but Nix, Helix doesn't have a little 8-legged pressure suit that he can wear to traipse over here now, does he?
We'll have to work on that.
Nix responded,
Might be a project for Plex when I get back to Niobe. Meanwhile, these readings are pretty disturbing, Your Highness. The whole star is enveloped in dark energy. Even now, as we speak. It's as if Loskeen were being smothered and imploded from without. Crushed inside an invisible shell of contracting dark matter.
I'll go you one better, Captain.
Ophelia proposed.
Perhaps if the dark matter isn't contracting, but rather expanding. As if the stars are drowning in a kind of dark matter tar.
That's quite an imagination you have, Beetlejuice.
Orlan replied.
Dark matter. Tar? Where would this additional matter be coming from? We're talking about a component of the universe that's been around since the beginning. An element that fills the space between the stars and other celestial objects. This stuff wouldn't be expanding and blotting out energy and light unless it were somehow seeping into our universe from somewhere else, from outside. Another dimension?
Ophelia inhaled sharply.
Yes. Yes, of course. Now that's odd. That's very odd.
She said, thinking out loud.
What is?
Orlan asked.
Nix?
The Queen responded.
Let's pursue the hypothesis for a moment. Could such a phenomenon be artificially set in motion? Like puncturing a hole in a bottle and letting the contents spill out?
Said content being this dark matter tar of yours?
Nix inquired.
Who, or what, is poking holes in our universe?
An aura of foreboding crashed like a great wave on the shoreline of Ophelia's perception. Immediately, her thoughts returned to the odd encounter in her throne room, to the pair of unlikely Neltatian delegates, Than and Triviod.
Twins, Nix. Two creatures who only hours ago tried to elicit my support for the formation of an unthinkable religion. An order of entropy. Tell me that's mere coincidence?
As the ramifications of her realization started to gel in her mind, Ophelia's focus was abruptly interrupted by a bright flash emanating from her vessel's otherwise nominal heads-up display. Reinforcing the rapidly flashing alert indicator was a persistent tone, repeating in her headset. The Queen tapped the visiplate in annoyance, the diversion inopportune as she speculated this frightening possibility with her Aeronaut. Then she saw what it was, an urgent subspace communique from Kindle Koblix. Oddly, Ophelia's handmaiden was not reaching out to her from Imperious Prime, but rather from a highly guarded military complex many light years away from the capital. Of course, she opened the channel immediately.
Kindle?
She answered.
Yes, my lady.
Came Koblix's response.
It is with a heavy heart that I must inform you that the Acropolis has been destroyed, essentially vaporized in a massive explosion, the exact epicenter of which were your own private chambers. I know this, Your Highness, because I was there at the moment of detonation. It was a blatant assassination attempt.
Incredulous, Ophelia shared the transcript of Koblix's report with Nix, and then tied his ship's comm into the channel. Once Orlan had been apprised of the situation, Ophelia bowed her head and started sobbing quietly.
Kindle, you were there?
Nix asked disbelievingly.
You saw who it was? A suicide bombing? But how? When you say you were there, you mean you were close enough to see who it was? The assassin?
No, Captain Orlan.
Koblix answered.
I was in the Queen's master bedroom, literally ground zero for the blast.
Speaking directly to Ophelia, she said,
My dear, I know it must be unimaginably awful for you to wrap your head around at this moment, but you must know. It was the Neltatian amulet, my dear, the gift left for you by Delegates Than and Triviod. We have since discovered these were not the actual names of the representatives from Neltet 6. Whoever or whatever they were, the lifeless corpses of the pair were discovered in the garden outside of the Acropolis. Sadly, an autopsy was not performed in time to determine the cause of death. The bodies were incinerated along with everything else.
Composing herself as best she could, Ophelia looked over at Nix through the cockpit glass and managed to choke out a single word.
Possessed?
Yes, my lady.
Kindle confirmed.
It seems your intuition may have been correct.
Now wait.
Nix interrupted.
I'm still trying to figure out how Koblix could have been in the room when the explosion took place. Don't get me wrong, dear. I'm not disappointed that you're still with us. But shouldn't you be a melted pool of plastic right now?
Sadly, yes. That was the fate of my physical body.
Kindle replied.
Though the consciousness of all royal synthetics are continuously backed up in real time off-world, Cheating death by way of fast uplink, Captain. Most effective.
Good for you, Koblix.
Nix said,
I'd have hated to inform Plex of your passing.
in an effort to get the Queen's mind focused away from the tragedy, he redirected the conversation back to her.
So, Beetlejuice. We need a base of operations, someplace safe where we can sort things out. I recommend my place on Niobe, about as remote as you can get. Whoever these assassins are, they don't know yet that their attempt to kill you has failed. We can put a copy of Kindle on my server and...
No, Captain.
The Queen replied,
Before we conceal ourselves away to play detective, the universe, my Imperium, will know that this coup has not succeeded. Give me several moments to compose my thoughts, Kindle, and then, if you would be so kind, open a channel for all to hear. Citizens of the Imperium, hear me? I, Ophelia Droxine Oberon, your queen and ruling empress of all the known universe, reach out to you this day, not as a proclamation of surrender or defeat, but rather with overwhelming resolve. As many of you are well aware, my home world of Imperious Prime has been ruthlessly attacked, and the capital, my home, destroyed. I know not who nor why this grievous act has been carried out, though I can only presume that the at-large perpetrators are listening in now and wondering if their insidious plot to overthrow the House of Oberon has accomplished the expected outcome. Let me be first to assure you that it most certainly has not. The Acropolis no longer stands, and for that, I am infinitely saddened. Those hallowed halls were corridors that echoed the cherished voice of wisdom from my past. My father and all those who came before him were my mentors. In a fiery maelstrom of death and destruction, my world has been turned upside down and crumbled into ruin. Brick and mortar have been laid waste, and yet I tell you, greatness still stands. What my ancestors have forever instilled in me is that this vast Imperium is my home, not a singular ball of dust caught in orbit around a singular sun. Your queen does not rule from a lofty throne. Hear me now and take heed. I stand, not above you, but with you, among you. My voice calls out in earnest, not as a command, but rather as a rallying cry for us all. So fear not. Darkness shall not carry the day. The light of the Imperium does not emanate from within the broken boughs of a shattered castle. The light comes from within the heart of Oberon, and I assure you, it shines now, brighter and bolder than ever before. Let the ashes fall, as they most certainly will. Above them burns the fire of a billion stars. We, the citizens of this vast Imperium, shall never, ever be extinguished.
Dialogue spoken by Cassius in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It is not in the stars to hold our destiny, but in ourselves. Dialogue from a play written long before this cast of characters were ever assembled upon a starlit stage of the known and as yet unknown universe. The dawn of darkness has broken across the Queen's Imperium. In order to carry the day, Ophelia must now bring the House of Oberon's legacy of leadership, strength, and courage to bear if she is going to somehow reverse that which has been unleashed upon her kingdom. Can this unlikely pair ever hope to undo the plague of darkness that is spreading like nameless rats beneath the thoroughfares of energy and light? So long as said light continues to shine, the answer to that question remains to be seen and likewise fanned like a flickering flame by a desperate breath of thin air.
Episode 26 of the Thin Air podcast anthology Imperium, Chapter 1 Dawn of Darkness, was written for audio by R.J. Lonsdale and John Milas. The program was produced, directed, narrated, and told by R.J. Lonsdale. The voice of the storyteller was performed by Valentino Niceth. The voice of King Ivis Mapalis Oberon was performed by Brian Graydon, Child Ophelia Droxine Oberon by Alice Tyndall, Adult Ophelia Droxine Oberon by Ella Hewitt, Nix Orlan by Jake Lockley, Plex by Lucifer Tyrrell, Helix the Trillnat by Reginald Kane, Kindle Koblix by Liz Kingston, Than by Drew Adler, and Triviad by Cassandra Stoyer. The voices of Captain Zebulon and co-pilot Daystrom were performed by Annie McRaven and Okole Westcott. Audio production for this Thin Air episode by R.J. Lonsdale of Flyby Studios. Music compositions used in this episode include Martian Cowboy by Kevin MacLeod, Blackout by Colin Root, Age of Wonder and Hymn to the Dawn by Scott Buckley, Seven Abandoned Theaters and Poseidon's Rest by CJT Dark Soundscapes, Alone, I See You and He Lies Broken by Your Shame by COAG Music, Synthetic by White Bat Audio, The Throne Room by Sir Cubworth, Vortex by Rage Sound, and A White City, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0. This has been an R.J. Lonsdale Flyby Studios presentation.
Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon and Nix Orlan will return in Chapter 2 of Imperium, Empress of Light. For now, farewell.